Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, day 501 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
The Lebanon ceasefire extension ended today, and we will start off today's episode by looking at what's happening on the ground in southern Lebanon right now. Then we'll turn to Gaza as Israel prepares to receive bodies of hostages murdered by Hamas on Thursday. We'll hear about new proposals for the day after in Gaza, including one from Defense Minister Israel Katz and some others. And we'll get a preview of the IDF's thorough investigations into the October 7th massacre that is due to be released next week. All this and much, much more when we're back. Manny, let's start with Lebanon. And as you suspected on Saturday when we spoke following the release of 3 Israeli hostages, the IDF is withdrawing from most of southern Lebanon today, but remaining in 5 strategic points. So just to review, under the ceasefire deal that was brokered by the United States in November, Israeli troops were granted 60 days to withdraw from southern Lebanon, where they had waged a ground offensive against fighters from Lebanon's Hezbollah terror group since early October. And Hezbollah operatives were to leave the zone, and Lebanese troops were to deploy to the area within the same period. The original deadline had been extended from January 26th until February 18th, today. So obviously things have surprisingly, not exactly gone to plan. And even today, Defense Minister Israel Katz said that starting today, the IDF will remain in a buffer zone in Lebanon in 5 strategic outposts that will continue to enforce forcefully and without compromise against any violation by Hezbollah. So much to unpack here. So let's start with these 5 points in this brand new buffer zone, which apparently the U.S. is on board with. So what are these 5 points making this quote unquote buffer zone?
So it isn't exactly a buffer zone. It's not anything close to what Israel had up until 2000, the whole security zone that was in southern Lebanon. It's not anything like that. We're talking about 5 army posts that were constructed inside Lebanon on these hills or sort of peaks just over the border in these strategic locations to allow the army to look over these Lebanese towns and villages on the border and make sure that nobody approaches the Israeli border. Because of the topography, there are hills on the Lebanese side which are higher than the ones on the Israeli side of the border. So we're talking about hills just across from Shlomi, another just across from Zarit, one across from Avivim and Malkia, one across from Margaliot, and another across from Metula. That's going from west to east along the border. These hills, in the past, some of them were Israeli army posts in pre-2000 when the IDF was deployed there. But it is not going to be a security zone where Israel is occupying Lebanese villages and towns. All of these posts are outside of the built-up area. So the army expects that there won't be any direct friction between Lebanese civilians returning to their homes and the IDF who are deployed outside of these towns. The army is, however, enforcing the fact that no one should be approaching the Israeli border. So people will be able to enter the towns, but reaching the border fence and or the wall in certain areas, the army will open fire on people who try to approach that area. But it is being coordinated with the US. The Lebanese army is coordinating with the US as well. There's this mechanism which has the US leading it, also UNIFIL as part of this mechanism, basically enforcing the ceasefire. And right now everyone is on board. It's not clear how long the IDF will stay at these army posts in Lebanon. It will be for the foreseeable future, and Israeli officials have said that they will remain there until Hezbollah completely withdraws from South Lebanon, withdraws beyond the Litani River line and heads north. And the Lebanese army does its part of the deal by enforcing the fact that there should be no Hezbollah in South Lebanon, removing its infrastructure. This could take a few weeks, it could take months, it could never happen, and the army will stay there indefinitely. It really does depend on how things develop with this mechanism and the Lebanese army and what Hezbollah does.
Manny, what makes you so sure that this isn't going to turn into a buffer zone? Obviously, we have buffer zones with other borders. Why do you think that this won't become something more permanent? Because as you said, or you reported at least, the IDF has already created 5 real outposts with some building and infrastructure in each of these 5 sites. So why wouldn't this necessarily roll into something more permanent?
I mean, they are relatively small. I suppose there is some sort of buffer zone, very limited, within a few dozen meters of the Israeli border. But it's not like what we know in Gaza, where anyone who approaches the border, 300 meters, or if it's even now a kilometer into Gaza, will be shot. This is really not the case. We're talking about posts which are manned by, I would say, a relatively small number of troops. And it's not in every single area. It's just overlooking certain, as they call it, strategic positions to better defend Israeli communities. It's not intended to prevent anybody from going back to their homes in Lebanon, but rather to defend the Israeli towns. And Israel knows that it can withdraw back into Israel and still defend the communities. It's just the army is describing it as a relatively temporary measure, but it could really, as you mentioned, become something more permanent. The South Lebanon security zone lasted for 20 years. Until Israel withdrew in 2000. So it could end up something like that. I don't think it will. I think we will see the Lebanese army step up its operations and Israel eventually withdraw from these areas. I will also note that on the Israeli side of the border, the army has also beefed up defensives significantly there. There's now new army posts, in addition to the 5 in Lebanon, but new army posts along the border on the Israeli side, one in front of every single Israeli community. They've upgraded all the cameras, the sensors, the radars on the border, and there will be triple the number of troops on the border compared to what it was before the war. So just putting that in perspective.
Yeah, and I also just want to ask you finally, how happy is the IDF so far with the cooperation with the Lebanese army and UNIFIL? Because, of course, we've heard strong, harsh criticism of both bodies in the past in terms of any kind of, keeping the peace there. So what's happening now, Manny?
So the army is still saying that the Lebanese army is acting slower than expected against Hezbollah. But in recent days, there has been an improvement, a significant improvement even in their actions. When Israel notifies this mechanism, which includes the US, France, Lebanon, and UNIFIL, of violations of the ceasefire, then the Lebanese army is supposed to act. So they were very slow to act in the beginning. Their deployment was much slower than expected, but there has been an improvement. With that said, if the Lebanese army fails to act against a specific target that Israel has warned about, then Israel will act itself. It will strike the position. It has done already before similar cases, and everything is still being coordinated with the mechanism. So if the Lebanese army fails to act within a certain amount of time, then Israel will tell the mechanism, okay, we'll act against it instead. And additionally, Israel still reserves the right to act against any immediate threat. So if Hezbollah is planning to carry out an attack, or if it's smuggling weapons into Lebanon, then Israel will act against those as it considered an imminent threat and not something that can be dealt with by the mechanism.
Let's go to a short break and then we'll turn to Gaza. And we're back. Israel is expecting to receive the bodies of 4 hostages from Hamas on Thursday, according to an Israeli official that spoke with us at the Times of Israel yesterday. Now, this is under the provisions of the first stage of the ongoing ceasefire with the Palestinian terror group. And in the agreement with Hamas, the bodies of a number of hostages will be returned to Israel starting from the 33rd day of the ceasefire. This is Thursday. So, Manny, we're not expecting to see any more live hostages until Saturday, which will be our date again. We'll speak, I'm sure, then. But until then, how is Israel preparing to receive these bodies, 4 bodies. And do we at this point even know who they may be?
We unfortunately don't know who they will be because of the list of 33 hostages slated for release in the phase 1 of the deal, Hamas has said that 8 are dead, but Israel doesn't have the exact names. Only 1 has officially been confirmed dead by Israel. So the other 7, Israel has intelligence on some of them. They have notified the families of those who Israel expects are not alive, but there's nothing concrete yet. So what we will see on Thursday is Hamas will give Israel the names of the hostages of the bodies that it is returning, and then Israel will receive the bodies later in the day. They'll be taken to the Abu Kabir Forensic Institute, and once they are identified, only then will the families be notified. So it's going to be a bit of a longer process than compared with the living hostages, who are very easily identifiable immediately. We're talking about bodies that of hostages that may have died months ago. They may have been killed on October 7th and taken to Gaza. So they may be dead for many, many months, and it's much more difficult to identify them like that. So it will be a bit of a longer process. I don't know how Hamas will actually do the release itself, whether or not they'll do their usual parade or if they'll do it more quietly. We still don't know that, but on Thursday will be the first 4 bodies. And then on Saturday, of course, we'll see 3 living hostages. And then the following Thursday, we'll see 4 more bodies. That will be the total of 8 dead hostages in the first phase of the deal. And then on the last 2 Saturdays, we will see also the rest of the final 3 living hostages being released, including Hisham Basayed and Avera Mengistu, who have been held in Gaza for over a decade.
Egyptian TV is reporting that heavy equipment has begun crossing from Egypt into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. And Egypt is actually also reporting that it is developing a plan to rebuild Gaza without forcing Palestinians out of the Strip, in a counter offer, in a way, to President Donald Trump's proposal to depopulate the territory so the U.S. can take it over. We're hearing that the proposal calls for establishing secure areas within the Gaza Strip where Palestinians can live while the Egyptian and international construction firms remove and rehabilitate the enclave's infrastructure. Now, at the same time, Defense Minister Israel Katz has called for a new directorate in the Defense Ministry that is tasked for enabling Palestinians to, quote unquote, voluntarily leave the Gaza Strip as per Trump's stated plans. So, Manny, what do you know about this new directorate?
So Defense Minister Katz made this announcement last night, saying, of course, that he welcomes Trump's plan. He's been saying this a few times already, and he wants to establish a new unit within the Defense Ministry that will be responsible for leading these efforts to allow Palestinians to leave Gaza. And he says that it will include, the plan at least will include support that will be given to these Palestinians with special arrangements to allow them to leave through the sea, air, land, to basically enable them to emigrate to another country, to a third state, meaning not to the West Bank or to Israel, of course. That's as much as we really know. There isn't that much else, and it's kind of up in the air right now. We don't know exactly how this will be carried out, but I will note that up until now, Palestinians have left Gaza before. It's not something novel for Palestinians to leave the Strip. Even during the war, Israel enabled, well, in the beginning, Palestinians were leaving through Rafah into Egypt when it was before Israel controlled the Rafah border crossing. And during the war, Israel allowed sick Palestinians to leave through Kerem Shalom and receive medical aid in the UAE or in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem. And during the ceasefire as well, sick Palestinians have been leaving the Rafah crossing into Egypt and receiving medical care in other countries. So it's not anything basically novel to have Palestinians leaving Gaza. What is I think a key issue is that, of course, Egypt is very much against the depopulation of Gaza, or allowing masses of Palestinians to leave the Strip. And it may come to a situation where Egypt refuses to allow the Palestinians who want to leave to basically leave through Egypt. So I think the special arrangements that Katz is talking about is other methods of allowing Palestinians to leave Gaza, which isn't via Egypt, but via other areas. The Ramon airport in southern Israel has been used in the past to allow Palestinians to travel to the UAE. So that may be one of the parts of the plan that is used.
Right. I think what isn't novel is, as you said, the leaving of the Gaza Strip. It's the scope and potential numbers of people who could choose to leave. And I think this is also part of what our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to get across, that he wants these people to have a choice. But at the same time, of course, as you said, Egypt doesn't necessarily want to be the home of another 2 million potential residents, and especially not residents who are fleeing their homes. So it's a very tricky situation, something we're following up on. And in the meantime, of course, it's not calm necessarily on the ground in Gaza. And the IDF carried out a pair of drone strikes on Sunday, one targeting a group of gunmen who were approaching IDF forces in one area, and the other as a warning when a car drove near soldiers in another area. So, Manny, tell us about these drone strikes, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the first since the ceasefire was established in, January 19th, right?
Yes, so the army has been carrying out strikes in Gaza against what it says are violations, or Palestinians are trying to approach Israeli forces. So we've seen many such strikes before. This recent one in the Rafah area targeted gunmen who the IDF says were approaching Israeli forces. So a drone strike was carried out against them, and it turns out that they were Hamas policemen. Hamas claims that they were securing the entry of aid, but the army has put out very clear instructions on the deployment of Israeli forces, where they're located and where people Palestinians can't go to, especially those who are armed. There isn't any coordination between Israel and Hamas in these regards. So if gunmen are approaching Israeli forces, they're in an area which is prohibited, then they're going to be targeted. We saw several times also the army carry out strikes against vehicles trying to travel to northern Gaza via unapproved routes. So right now, vehicular traffic, northbound vehicular traffic that is only permitted on the Salahuddin Road, where a private company is inspecting cars. An Egyptian American funded and manned security company. There have been attempts by vehicles to travel to North Gaza via other routes, via the coastal road, or via other areas that is not on Salahuddin, and the IDF has struck vehicles or near vehicles to try and warn them to turn around. I think I've counted more than 10 of these incidents since the ceasefire. So it's something that the army keeps trying to enforce, but on the other side, the instructions probably seem to not be clear enough because this keeps happening.
After lengthy delays, the Israeli military announced on Sunday that it had completed its investigations into its failures during the lead up to the Hamas terror group's October 7th, 2023 onslaught, and would begin presenting its findings next week. Now, we've seen some leaks in Israeli media already of some of the findings. We're choosing to publish them in context. But Manny, can you give us a little insight into what we should expect next week when we hear about the investigations?
So the IDF will be presenting its investigations pretty much packaged together. There was something the army learned when it presented its probe into the attack on Be'eri many months ago, that this was a tactical investigation into the actions of troops on the ground that day, but didn't look into the wider picture, didn't look into the decision-making of top officers, it didn't look at the army's intelligence, and there was a lot of criticism surrounding it, and a lot of people and even troops who participated in the fight, they felt as if they were being blamed for everything that happened on October 7th. So learning from that, the army has now not published each of the probes as it has completed them, which is what it wanted to do initially, but rather wait until they were all concluded and then present them from basically the top moving down. So the army has, at the general staff level, at the top command of the army, there's four main subjects in the investigations. There's the perception of Gaza, with an emphasis on the border starting around 2018, the intelligence assessments of Hamas, the decision-making process on the eve of October 7th, and the orders given during the battles on October 7th to October 10th when troops restored control. And under those four subjects are 18 subtopics, all sorts of topics like how the army called up reservists and supply of equipment, etc. And basically at this general staff level, there are several investigations. There's one carried out by the Air Force, one carried out by the Navy, one by the Intelligence, one by the Operations Directorate. So all sorts of bodies will be at the top level, will be looking at all these four topics and the 18 subtopics. And then in addition, there's 41 battles. One, of course, has already been presented, the Be'eri probe. So what the army will be doing is, starting next week, is first present the four main topics, the general staff level investigations. And then once those have been presented, then there will be the 40 battles they will be presented. Initially, we will see the probes into the battles at Nir Oz, Kfar Aza, Nachal Oz, and Netiv HaSara. Then the Nachal Oz army post and massacre at the Nova Music Festival. They'll be presented sometime in early March. And then the remaining 30 or so battles will be presented by the end of March, according to this timeline that I've seen. They're starting with the most, I would say, not the most important, but the most prominent and most the larger battles that took place at the beginning, and then slowly moving down to the smaller incidents that took place during October 7th. But over the following few weeks, starting from next Tuesday, we will see basically every day the army release a new investigation, starting, of course, with the larger ones and moving down to the smaller battles.
How public do you think the information is going to be spread? Meaning, isn't some of this still classified? Is there no censorship on this? We've discussed the censor many times. How much are we going to know? What percentage do you think?
The army is saying that it will be very transparent, or as transparent as possible, with the Israeli public and, of course, with the communities that it will be presenting its probes into. But it is really important to note that these investigations are internal army investigations aimed at drawing operational conclusions for the IDF, so it can be a better army to prepare for something like this in the future, to make sure that October 7th doesn't happen again. It's not a outside investigation or something that, of course, we know that the Israeli political leadership does not want to have a national commission of inquiry. It's not anything like that. It's an internal investigation. So there will be things in the investigation that will not be released to the public, or they'll be released in a more censored way. But we will try, of course, as journalists as well, to try and report as much as possible, to try and get out as much as we can. But I do think that, especially with regard to the intelligence investigations, there will be certain things that we will not be able to be reported on.
Right. And again, just to emphasize what you just said, this is the army investigating the army on what happened on October 7th and leading up to it, perhaps following as well. But it's not the political investigation, and it's not this holistic investigation that so many in Israel are calling for. Manny, we look forward to hearing all about it. And you and I will likely speak again on Saturday with the releases of 3 more hostages living, hopefully. And thank you, as always, for your updates and insights today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.